Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Colorful Profiles, our 6-week journey exploring short stories of extraordinary and unexpected characters from Jewish history. Today we will be doing lesson 4, which is titled Heroes and Hostages. Now, as many of you know, we have with us a bunch of guests here today because we chose to reach out and offer this lesson to anyone who's not registered for this course. They're still welcome to come to this lesson. And that's because of the unfortunate, all too painful reality that this is a current issue. Now, I don't intend to solve this issue here today on the class. I wish I could, but unfortunately, as we say, some things are in the hands of Hashem. Really, everything is in the hands of Hashem, but some things are very obviously in the hands of Hashem. And so I'd like to take a moment to welcome all of those that are here because of the independence of this lesson and the fact that it's so relevant. So what we are, and before we begin, I just wanted to say that today's lesson is dedicated in tribute to Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky, of blessed memory, a big chassid, Rabbi Moshe Yehuda ben Reb Tzvi Yosef Alav HaShalom. He was, for a very, very long time, one of the biggest powerhouses in the Chabad movement. Today is his first, I'm sorry, not today, yesterday, was his first yard site. He chaired the Kinos. He was the chairman of the Jewish Learning Institute, which is the origin of this course that we're doing right now. What was that? Okay, could be. And he was entrusted and empowered by the Rebbe to facilitate the growth and expansion of the network of Chabad Shluchim and its institutions worldwide. He did a fantastic job. And I want to say that his neshama should have an aliyah, and the learning that we'll do today will be in his merit. Today's lesson is generously co-sponsored by Phil and Sonia Wershba, and Yitzchak Isaac and Greta Leinberg, both of whom will be here this evening. Now I think we're ready to get started. So every single week in the shul, if you join us here at Chabad, you know that we have these double-sided cards. On one side is a prayer for the IDF, and we say a special Mishaberach for the Chayalei Tzva and Al Yisrael, these soldiers that are fighting on the front lines for our safety. And on the other side is a prayer for the hostages, which we sing together each week. And this mitzvah, this topic, if you will, of hostages and kidnapped, those that are in captivity, and those that are kidnapped, and those that find themselves in distressful situations because of captors, is not a new topic from a Jewish perspective. So what we are going to be trying to do today is two things at the same time, and hopefully we can do them both justice. Number one is just history. Let's tell some stories. Let's understand what are some of the most famous hostage crises or hostage situations that there were in Jewish history in times bygone. And while we're doing that, we're going to be examining it with a very particular lens, which is what can we take away from those stories today? And some of those will be things that the Israeli government can take away from today, or maybe that the leaders of the IDF can take away from that. And obviously that won't be as relevant to us. But as you'll soon see, much of it will be relevant to us. There will be aspects that we can really relate to and really get on board with as we go along. Now, we're going to begin with text 1. Text 1 is from the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch is the Jewish code of law. It's basically the handbook for how a Jew is supposed to live. In the Jewish code of law, as you can imagine, there are sections for every single mitzvah, particularly for the mitzvahs that are relevant today, that don't need a temple, etc. And as you're going through Yoredeya is one of the 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch, you come across a very interesting mitzvah, and it is text 1. Mark, can you read it for us, please?
Okay, that's
on page 145.
Yeah. The redemption of captives takes priority over sustaining the poor and providing them with clothing. There is no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives. If we ignore the redemption of captives, we transgress the following prohibitions. You shall not harden your heart to the needy, Deuteronomy 15:7. You shall not shut your hand to the needy, Deuteronomy 15:7. You shall not stand by when you're turning the page. Fellow's life is in danger, Leviticus 19:16. and you may not allow a worker to be oppressed ruthlessly. Leviticus 25:53. In neglecting to redeem captives, we also negate the following proactive mitzvot. You shall surely open your hand to your needy fellow. Deuteronomy 15:8. Your brother shall live with you financially. Leviticus 25:36. Love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19:18. Rescue those taken for death. Proverbs 25:11. And many similar statements. If we delay redeeming captives when it is possible to hasten, it is as if we are spilling blood in every added moment.
The Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish Code of Law, is trying to impress upon us the importance of redeeming captives. If we know about a Jew who finds himself in captivity, it is a mitzvah, it is an obligation on every single Jew to do whatever they can to redeem him. In Hebrew, this is called Pidyon Shvuyim. Pidyon Shvuyim means redeeming captives. Literally, Shvuyim, Shevi, for those of you familiar, that's the term they're using now in Israel. They use the term Shvuyim, they use the term Chatufim. Okay, there are two different Hebrew words. But what I want to point out is just how many verses were quoted in support of this mitzvah. And if you pay attention with me here on the screen, for those of you that can see, you'll notice that it actually encompasses within it 4 different mitzvahs. These different verses encompass within it 4 different mitzvahs. You shall not harden your heart and you shall not shut your hand. These are verses that usually refer to charity. And the Shulchan Aruch is telling us that Pidyon Shvuyim, redeeming captives, is definitely charity. That is a mitzvah of charity. It is a part of that mitzvah. Okay. As we move along, there's another verse which is, "You shall not stand by when your fellow's life is in danger." Right? I think many of you are familiar with the literal translation. Do not stand by the blood of your fellow. Right? But essentially, that is a commandment that if you see somebody being killed or somebody in harm, that you have to save them. The Shulchan Aruch tells us that this applies to saving captives because they are almost always, almost certainly also in physical danger. The next verse, "You may not allow a worker to be oppressed ruthlessly," means that you're not allowed, to perpetuate slavery. From a Jewish perspective, we are not allowed to perpetuate slavery. Whole different question about the concept of indentured servants in the Torah, not for now. But if a fellow Jew is in slavery, which is certainly what captivity is, so then you have an obligation to redeem them. And finally, the last and most overarching mitzvah is to love your fellow as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself, which of course is Ahavat Yisrael, to love a fellow, and as part of that comes the mitzvah of redeeming captives. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch is attempting to tell us that not only is redeeming captives a mitzvah, it is the greatest mitzvah. And he doesn't say so lightly. He brings all these verses to show you that if a person has the ability to, let's say, give money towards Pidyon Shvuyim, towards ransoming a captive, then they have to do everything they can. And in fact, if they don't, then not only have they violated some negative commandments where the Torah tells us don't do this, don't do that, but actually many positive commandments we have obligating us to do so. And so I want to open up with that because I think that really sets the stage for just how important this mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim is. Okay. Having said that, all of these mitzvahs come together to this one mitzvah that's usually called Pidyon Shvuyim, or redeeming captives. All right. So today we are going to be exploring 3 episodes. The first one is what the four captives together that are known as the 4 captives. The second one is the famous Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, or the Maharam of Rothenburg. And the third one is actually a communal captive situation in which tens of thousands of Jews were held captive, and we will learn about them one at a time as we go through. Okay? Let's start off with the first episode. Yes. What's the question? Yes, correct. Very good. The first episode of captivity that we are going to start with it was a history-changing event. So I'm going to start by setting the historical backdrop, if you will. The Second Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 to the Common Era. And this brought to an end the Jewish sovereignty of the land of Israel. I think a lot of you are going to be familiar with this from the previous course. Those of you that attended the previous course that we gave here called Decoding the Talmud, we spoke a lot about this. That as Rome, so under Roman occupation, in the beginning they allowed for an independent province. Eventually, the oppression became worse and worse. I think one of the major notable stages in that was when the Roman Emperor Constantinople adopted Christianity as the official religion of Rome at the time, the Roman Empire, excuse me, and the persecution of the Jewish people really intensified. Anyways, without getting into all of the details, eventually much of Judaism makes its way down to Babel, Babylon. Now, Babylon had already had quite a bit of a Jewish presence ever since the destruction of the first temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians. So again, we're getting to the Talmud Bavli. And it's in that period, we're talking about 400, 500, 600 to the Common Era, that the greatest Jewish scholarship exists, and most of it takes place in Babel. These are what are known as, for those of you that are following on the screen, the evolution of Torah is known as the Tanaim and the Amoraim. So the Tanaim are the scholars of the Mishnah, and they completed their work, the Mishnah, in Israel. Hello, welcome. Come here, yeah, absolutely. Come sit down. They concluded their work in Israel. And then the Amoraim, which is the next wave of sages, they finished the Talmud, like Avram said, the Talmud Bavli in Bavel, in Babylon. Okay. Now we know that if you skip another 1,000 years, right, you're going to get to European Jewry, right? You're eventually going to arrive in Spain, in Morocco. Morocco is not European Jewry, but you're going to have Jews all over the world. She has a copy right here. Everybody has a copy in front of them. Perfect. So the question is, what happens over those 500-600 years? So we're going to try not to give too much of to get too in detail to it. But there's a period that is known as the Gaonim. The Gaonim were those halachic authorities across the diaspora, and they continue even well into the thousands. By the way, well into the next millennium to answer questions and to lead the Jewish people, etc. Now, for the most part, over that period, Judaism, if you will, Jewish scholarship and leadership is being led from Bavel, being led from Babylonia. And at a certain point, because we know today we have Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardi Jews, etc., and none of that is in Bavel, right? None of that is Babylonia. I mean, I guess some Sephardi Jews, but for the most part, Sephardi Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, they come way later. So when do communities in North Africa, Spain, and Central Europe, when do they become much more independent and much more prominent in terms of Jewish scholarship? Right? When does that happen? For example, if you go further to the year 1200, you know about the famous, there's the golden era of Spain, there's the golden era of France. These are different areas in Europe that had huge Jewish scholarship. So how did that happen? It turns out it happens to have to do with our story. And our story begins with text 2. Susie, do you have the text in front of you?
Yeah, let me see. What page?
You want to read it for us, please? On page 149, text 2, we have the fateful journey.
149. So that it was brought about?
Yes, go ahead.
It was brought about by God that the income of the yeshivot, which used to come from Spain, the land of the Maghreb, Ifriqiya, Egypt, and the Holy Land, was discontinued. The following were the circumstances that brought this about. Ibn Rumahis, the commander of a fleet, left Cordoba, having been sent by the Muslim king of Spain, Abd al-Rahman al-Nasir. This commander of a mighty fleet set out to capture the ships of the Christians and the towns that were close to the coast. They sailed as far as the coast of the land of Israel and swung about to the Greek Sea and the islands therein. Here they encountered a ship carrying 4 great scholars who were traveling from the city of Bari to a city called Sebastian, and who were on their way to a convention. Ibn Rumahis captured the ship and took the sages prisoner. One of them was Rabbi
Hushiel.
What was that?
Hushiel,
the father of Rabbeinu Hananel. Another.
I can read the names if you like.
Okay.
One of them was Rabbi Hushiel, who was the father of Rabbeinu Hananel. Another was Rabbi Moshe, the father of Rabbi Hanoch, who was taken prisoner with his wife and son. Rabbi Hanoch, who was then but a young lad. Sorry, yeah, okay. And the third was Rabbi Shmaria ben Rabbi Elchanan. As for the fourth, I do not know his name. Okay, go ahead, Susie.
Okay. These sages did not tell a soul about themselves or their wisdom. The commander sold Rabbi in Alexandria of Egypt. Rabbi Shemaria proceeded to Fostat, where he became the head of the yeshiva. He then sold Rabbi Shushiel on the coast of Ifriqiya. From there, the rabbi proceeded to the city of Kairouan, which was then the mightiest of all Muslim cities in the land of the Maghreb, where he became the head of the yeshiva and where he begot his son, Rabbeinu Hanan. The commander then arrived at Cordoba, where he sold Rabbi Moshe along with Rabbi Hanoch. This affair continued in the days of Rabbi Sherira Gaon in about 4750, 990 Common Era, somewhat more or less.
Okay, so let's summarize what we just read, because I know there were a lot of names that if you wanted to translate each one, no, not just the names of the rabbis, but also the names of the regions, which Ifriqiya, I mean, I guess we would all assume it's Africa, but it's actually not. It's more like the Tunisia area of Africa. And you have the Maghreb, and you have all these different names. And instead of me trying to translate this all for you, why don't we summarize what happened here while looking at a map? On page 151, you'll see you have a map of the four captives saga, right? So they are living at the time in a city called Bari. The one area outside of Babylonia where there was a Jewish presence already for quite a while, and we have this historically documented, was in Italy. Bari is a city in Italy. So you can see that in the center, towards the top, that's Bari. They're going from there and they're traveling down. By all accounts, it seems like they were going to a city called Sephastin, which is probably Sfax. Today, that's modern day Tunisia. So they're kind of crossing the sea. They're going from Italy to Northern Africa. They're trying to get to Sfax, if you can see it on the map. As they're traveling, they encounter this pirate. Okay, and this pirate, these pirates, let's call them, right? And these pirates captured them. Now, this was very, very common in those days. You captured you captured human beings. They became your slaves, and you sold them on the slave market wherever you landed. These rabbis, however, made a very, very big point of not revealing their identities, not revealing who they are. Why? Because obviously, pirates in those days would have been familiar with the fact that Jews were happy to redeem their captives, and they also would have been familiar with the fact that different slaves are worth different amounts, right? And therefore, they would have raised the price had they known that these were very, very great sages. But the truth is, they were very, very well learned in the Torah. They were all four traveling together to this conference. What is this conference? In Talmudic times, this was known as Yarchei Kala. Yarchei Kala means that all of the rabbis from as much of the world as possible, as they were able to get together, would come together to study the Talmud together, to compare notes, and to in Hebrew we say Yagdil Torah v'Yadir, to strengthen the Torah and to glorify it. Beautiful. Good question. Not for now. Okay, but right, you understand, because it's a topic for another time. I want to stay focused on this story for a second. So they're traveling. This is the year 990 to the Common Era. Rav Sherira Gaon is the most well-respected Jewish scholar at the time. Where is he? He's leading from Babylon, as you would imagine, from Babylonia. And this boat carrying these four accomplished Torah scholars is intercepted by pirates, and they are taken captive. Okay, they keep their status as rabbis a secret, and eventually they end up being sold to Jewish communities, but they do not allow, they get sold wherever they get sold, okay? Because remember, they're keeping this completely a secret. The pirates have no idea that these are, that these are amazing Jewish scholars. And also the Jewish communities that are redeeming them have no idea who it is that they're redeeming, as we're about to find out. Now, they get sold, if you're still with me on the map on page 151, they get sold to different communities in four completely different areas. One gets sold to the Egypt area, another one gets sold to the Spain area, another one gets sold to Kairouan, another one gets sold to the Turkey area. Anyways, basically all around the Mediterranean. These cities, they get sold to have Jewish communities, but they're very small Jewish communities. So for example, in those days, a Jewish community would have only been able to like a small satellite Jewish community like this would have not really been able to do much of their own Torah study. They would have had a shul, they would have had a yeshiva, etc., to be able to do whatever they can. But any questions that they really had, they would send to Babylonia. And in fact, they would send money to Babylonia to maintain and to sustain the yeshivas there, so that the yeshivas were able to continue to prosper. Okay. You can see some of this going on, by the way. On page 151, they have a manuscript, and then on page 148, they had a manuscript, etc., where you see Rav Shriya and Rav Hai Gaon, for example, sending answers to questions to Egypt. So they're sending from Babylonia to Egypt. You see this influence in many documents that have been discovered or that were preserved since that time. Okay, beautiful. Let's read about how one of these captives arrives in this one. It's going to be Cordoba, so this will be Spain. But let's see how he arrives and what his reception is. Who can read for us? Elise, are you still here? It's hard for me. I got too much technology.
Yes, hold on.
Oh, there you go. If you can read for us, please, Elise, text 3, Rise to Fame. We're on page 153. You'll see what happens when Rabbi Moshe is redeemed by the people of Cordoba.
Okay, what page is that? Sorry.
Page 153.
Okie dokie. All right. Not really prepared.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm ready. I
Okay.
just wasn't quite prepared to read. Okay, Rabbi Moshe was redeemed by the people of Cordoba, who were under the impression that he was a man of no education. Now in Cordoba, there was a synagogue that was called Knesset HaMidrash, the study gathering hall, where a judge by the name of Rabbi Natan the Pious, who was a man of distinction, used to preside. Rabbi Moshe was seated in the corner like an attendant, and he arose before Rabbi Natan and challenged an interpretation Rabbi Natan had given. When Rabbi Natan and the students heard Rabbi Moshe's words, they marveled to each other and asked him to explain the law to them. This he did quite properly. Then each of them posed to him all the difficulties that they had, and he replied to them with his abundant wisdom. Outside the study hall, there were litigants who were not permitted to enter until the students had completed their lesson. On that day, Rabbi Natan, the judge, walked out, and the litigants followed him. However, he said to them, I am no longer judge. This man who is dressed in rags and is a stranger is my master, and I shall be his disciple from this day on. You ought to appoint him the judge of the community of Cordoba. And that is exactly what they did. The community then assigned Rabbi Moshe to a large stipend and honored him with expensive garments and a carriage. At that point, the commander wished to retract his sail. However, the king would not permit him to do so, for he was delighted by the fact that the Jews of his domain no longer needed the people of Babylonia. The report of all this spread throughout the land of Spain and the Maghreb. The students came to study under Rabbi Moshe. Moreover, all questions which had formerly been addressed to the academies of Babylonia were now directed to him. The communities of West and East did not resume the sending of gifts to the academies in Babylonia because these scholars raised many disciples and the knowledge of the Talmud spread throughout the world.
This is essentially the story of the beginning of Spanish Jewry. It's not the beginning, obviously. It's not the first Jew to arrive in Spain, but this is the beginning of when you have a major Torah scholar that arrives in that area and starts to raise other Torah scholars, and he's got this yeshiva going, etc. So then that really brings Jews to that area. They flock to him, and by the way, we know about one of the students. Rabbi Moshe had a son whose name was Chanoch, as we learned, right? And Rabbi Chanoch had a student whose name was Rabbi Shmuel Hanagid. You guys remember him? We learned about him 2 weeks ago when we studied, for those who are taking the full course, when we did the lesson on influential Jews. We studied about Shmuel Hanagid, who ended up being the military commander, in addition to a great Torah scholar, etc., for those of you that remember that story. Okay. Now, this fascinating story, these captives, it doesn't just happen only in Spain, it happens in other places as well. You remember Rabbeinu Hananel, who was the son of Rabbi Chushiel, one of the 4 captives? Rabbeinu Hananel is known as one of the foremost commentary on the Talmud. After Rashi and Tosfot, that is the one you look to. I remember studying it. There are even periods, for example, there are sections of the Talmud where there is no Rashi, and then Rabbeinu Hananel becomes the main commentary. Okay. And as Rabbi Moshe Avigdor Amiel puts it in text 4, this becomes a major providential moment. In other words, I don't know that anybody at the time who had heard that let's say at the Yarchei Kala, at the conference, if they heard that four rabbis were kidnapped, I don't know if they would have been celebrating it. I don't know if they even would have been looking for the hand of providence, although they would have believed in it. But eventually, it becomes clear that this providence actually led to what we know today as world Jewry, or the spreading of Torah scholarship all around the world. And this is what Rabbi Moshe Daniel points out in text 4 on page 155. Nick, you want to read for us? The hand of providence.
As the sun set on the yeshiva of Sura and Pumbedita in Babylonia, the world was desolate, and it seemed the Torah was set to be forgotten. But then, precisely at this critical time, the Torah spread to all corners of the earth, reaching as far as Egypt and Africa, Spain and France. For God left us a remnant, the 4 captives. Divine providence arranged that these men be taken captive and sold as slaves in the 4 corners of the world in order to spread Torah even to distant lands. Anyone who looks with open eyes will see that this jug of oil, the Torah, has not yet emptied, for this miracle continues to repeat itself in our days. Just as the Jewish people are eternal, so is this jug of oil eternal. Moreover, the eternity of the Torah is the root of the eternity of the Jewish people.
Thank you. In the Talmud, there is a statement that says, "Tzedakah asa Kadosh Baruch Hu leYisrael shapizron lebein ha'umot," that there is a kindness that God did to the Jewish people, that He spread them out among the nations. Now, if you talk to one of these heavy Aliyah proponents, people who believe that everybody has to make Aliyah to Israel, they would say, "What are you talking about? Jews should be in Israel, and that's it. We should all be in Israel. We should all be in Israel." There's no question that we all yearn for the time when Mashiach will come, and we'll all be able to live in the Holy Land. But until that time, it's actually one of the greatest kindnesses that Hashem did, even though we call it Galut. And it is a reality that it is exile, but still it is one of the greatest kindnesses that Hashem did, that there are Jews all over the world. Think about it. At a time when there's major persecution of Jews in one country, in another country, they're still studying Torah. Think, for example, of the burning of the Talmud in Paris, right? For those of you that are familiar with that episode. While that's going on in Paris, and Jews in Paris are struggling to even be able to keep the Torah alive, Jews in Spain or Jews in Germany or whatever else, well, Germany was kind of the same thing. Germany and Paris, I think, was the same zone at the time, or ruled by the same empire, whatever it was. But basically, there were always Jews all over the world, and therefore Torah was able to continue to flourish. Now, this is the end of our first story. But I want to take a moment to talk about what are some of the lessons that we can learn from the 4 captives. I think probably the most important lesson we learn from them is the value of the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim. We learn so many things in the opening text about the importance of redeeming captives. It's Ahavat Yisrael, it's love of a fellow, it's tzedakah, it's charity, it's saving a life, it's all of these wonderful things, and they really are all true. Yet simultaneously, there's something very powerful about understanding that there is the hand of God, as difficult as it is, because Pidyon Shvuyim is a horrific scenario. You have someone who's being held hostage. You have someone who's been taken captive, and the hand of God is involved in this. But we know the hand of God is involved in everything. Why? Perhaps it takes us. I doubt that there were. I would never be brazen enough today to start giving you reasons for the hostage crisis in Israel. Obviously, it's horrible, right? But I don't think anybody would have done the same when these four rabbis were taken captive either. However, it's important to understand that everything is by divine providence. And while we never give God reasons, sometimes hundreds of years later, we are privileged to be able to see those reasons in hindsight. So I guess that's one of the things we can gain from this story, is the importance of recognizing that Hashem controls everything. Okay. But that's just been to get our feet wet. The next episode that we are going to explore, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, is probably the most remarkable and heroic story of all time, or at least of all hostage takings. It's definitely the most famous hostage scenario. If you ask any religious Jew on October 8th or on October 10th, whenever it became clear that this is going to be a hostage crisis, the first parallel, and you ask them, what does the Torah have to say about this? The first real life parallel that comes to mind is Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. What is the story? It's a snapshot of the story of Ashkenazi Jews of France and Germany in the 13th century, which is a pivotal time for their history. And to begin with, we are going to watch a video. I hope that this will go well to the people on Zoom. If not, I will link the video in a follow-up email that I'll send out. And this video is just of an academic scholar kind of giving us the overview of the story, and then we'll dive into some of the details. All right? Please turn your attention to the video screens.
We don't have an exact year of birth for Mayor of Rothenburg, which is very common in the medieval period. There were no birth certificates or other certificates. We believe he was born somewhere between 1215 and 1220 something. He was originally from Worms in the Rhineland, and that's where he's buried to this day, because there were not a lot of great scholars left in Germany at that particular time. Mayor of Rothenburg went to France. He went to northern France, where he studied with a series of very important Tosafists, those who commented on the Talmud and on Rashi's commentary to the Talmud. That started in the mid-12th century. He got there somewhere, we know when he was there, he got there somewhere around 1230 or 40, again, depending on when he was born. And his most important teacher there was someone named Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. And that's important for a number of reasons, aside from Rabbi Yechiel being a great Torah scholar. Mayor of Rothenburg was apparently in Paris when the Talmud was burned in the year 1242. That was the result of the so-called trial of the Talmud in 1240. Not that it was all disaster. There were plenty of good Torah study. And in that respect, Mayor of Rothenburg took in this French Tosafist method of study of comparing texts and resolving texts. And Rothenburg was not his original hometown. Rothenburg is in south central Germany. He seems to have gone there once he came back from northern France. Maharam very quickly becomes the Gadol Hador, the leading Torah scholar of his generation. Again, not just because there weren't many others, but he really distinguished himself. Already in the 1240s, the trial of the Talmud, which Maharam witnessed, that's the 1240s. As we move forward, the Jews in northern France are under tremendous economic pressure, meaning money is owed to them, debts are canceled, so their livelihoods are basically threatened to the core. There are physical persecutions, there are attempts at conversion. Again, the rulers, some of them try to provide some security, servi camerai, serfs of the chamber. The king will protect the Jews, but these protections, and France and Germany are a little different here, but these protections don't always hold up. And many of the questions that Maharam received were questions about things that happened during conversionary efforts. So again, on the basis of all the earlier persecutions, Maharam was not, in that sense, jumping ship. It was pikuach nefesh. Maharam believed that his life was in danger. Whether he knew somehow that he might be captured or something else is purely speculative, but in any case, Maharam he leaves Germany. Apparently Maharam was on the way to Israel. What we know for sure is that he moves eastward. He's in Germany, which is sort of the center of the Holy Roman Empire. As you move southeast, you get to Italy, right? The Alps, however you cross, however you go around. And apparently in 1286, this we have some contemporary documentation, Maharam, he apparently had stopped there to wait for others to come with him to follow. And Maharam was captured by agents of the Holy Roman Emperor, by agents of the King of Germany, who also had control of this area of Italy. Again, there are suggestions that somebody informed on Maharam or informed them that Maharam, again, great scholars had to travel incognito. You can ask the question, is this mainly anti-Semitism? Is this mainly economic? Is this mainly political? And the answer to that question is yes, all of the above. They were looking for the economic benefits. They were looking for the anti-Jewish benefits. They were looking for the political benefits, showing who's in charge. In any case, Maharam at that point is captured, and he is brought back by the Holy Roman Emperor to Germany, where he is put in at least one or two, maybe more, quote-unquote fortresses. These are not prisons in the Rikers Island sense, if I can say that. These are not prisons where you're treated horribly. He's a political prisoner. He's an economic prisoner. In other words, the capture was done so that the Jews would pay large sums of money to try to get Maharam out.
So let's summarize what we saw in the video just very briefly. Rabbi Meir is born in Worms. He's in Germany, but he goes to France to study with the Tosafist scholars, where he witnesses the burning of the Talmud after the so-called trial of the Talmud, right? And by the way, he writes, for those of you who remember this also, in the last course, decoding the Talmud, we quoted this. On Tisha B'Av, when we say the Lamentations, all of the kinos that we say on Tisha B'Av, one of the ones that we read is actually about the burning of the Talmud. I don't think it happened on Tisha B'Av, but it was in the vicinity, and we kind of, it's one of the things we mourn on Tisha B'Av is that. And all of there's a lamentation that's written by Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg at that time. On page 1391, you can see that as Rabbi Meir came home to Germany and became one of the leading scholars of the generation, he page 157, you could see figure 4.3, the final page of a manuscript which is titled Sefer Sinai. Sefer Sinai is the responsa. Responsa is like kind of these questions and answers that people are writing from all over Europe at the time to Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. So he's a very, very great rabbi. Now, what exactly it is that caused him to feel like it's important for him to flee is a good question. Generally speaking, Jewish rabbis usually take the approach of putting their lives in danger for their communities, etc. But I think we can trust Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. There was a good reason why he needed to flee. There's a good chance he was going to Israel. It's not clear. He says, Artseinu HaChaim, he's going to the lands of life. But most people assume that that's the land of Israel, also based on the direction that he was going. And he starts to flee. Okay? So he's fleeing to northern Italy in order to get on a ship and leave from there. In northern Italy, they have a reason to wait. Okay? They're waiting for the rest of the group, for other families. And we can read about this in text 5 on page 158. Mickey, you want to read it for us, please? Daring dash.
Mayor Rothenberg, son of Henry, set out on a journey to cross the sea, along with his household, daughter, son-in-law, and all his possessions. He arrived in a city situated on the high mountain known as Amordice.
Your guess is as good as mine. I wouldn't be able to pronounce it any better. Yeah, go ahead.
In Germany. He intended to stay there until all those traveling would gather there. Such the wicked bishop of Oslo rode down from Rome through that city, together with him, apostate Nepe. Nepe recognized and informed the bishop. This caused Count Reinhardt of the Lord of the city to arrest him. Fourth day of Tammuz, the year 46 of the 6th millennium, 1286 CE, and hand him over to King Rudolph.
Okay, so he's discovered and he's handed over to King Rudolph. Now, I want to talk for a moment about the text that Mickey just read. I don't often do this. I usually just say, "Oh, it's a text. We're reading it. That's fine. Trust me, they're all significant." This is the text that he just read has a history in and of itself. It's being quoted here from Minhagot Ramaiza, page 252. What are Minhagot Ramaiza is like this. In 1615, a local Christian uprising expelled the Jews from Worms. The synagogue was destroyed. After the rebellion was quashed in the next year, the Jews were allowed to return back and to rebuild their community. In the ruins of the old synagogue, this is 400 years later, right, or 300 years later, in the ruins of the old synagogue, some ancient documents were found. One of which pertains to the story of Rabbi Meir's escape. That's this document that we just read. The document is undated, but it does seem to be contemporary. But it's fine. It seems that it was written by someone who was there at the time. It seems to be very, very current, like it's being written current. Okay, where were they headed? We were discussed that most likely to Israel, but definitely across the sea. There's no question. Now, he's put into prison, but not into a cruel prison, right? Not somewhere that he's being treated like a common thief, etc. It was very clear. This was a political, economical move. They had kidnapped him. You're trying to flee the country. I mean, it worked for everything. It worked for anti-Semitism because they were all anti-Semites. It worked for financial reasons. We're going to make money off of this. Beautiful. I mean, not beautiful, horrible, but okay. Now, King Rudolph puts him in this tower, in this prison, whatever it is, and he demands an exorbitant fee from the Jewish people, from the Jewish community of Worms at the time. Okay, this is where now this decree comes out on December 6th, 1286. We have the documents for it, and it's addressed to the provincial authorities of Germany. All escaped Jews are to be apprehended and returned, but only the Maharam of Rothenburg is going to be put into prison. Now, the problem is that the Jewish people have, unfortunately, history with this. We already read one story with the 4 captives, But honestly, it goes back all the way till Dinah. Dinah is the first biblical story, right, in the Torah, where she's abducted and how do we get her back, etc. As a result, there are laws about redeeming captives. We already saw just about the importance of this mitzvah. We do whatever we can in order to do it, right? We spare no expense, etc. However, there is an exception to this rule. Anna, you want to read for us, please? Text. No, you don't want. Okay. So where are we holding here on Zoom? I think we're back to you, Mark. If you can unmute yourself, Mark. If you can read for us, please. Text 6, societal concern. There you go.
Okay. Text 6.
Yeah.
For the sake of society at large, captives are not redeemed for more than their actual monetary value. The reason for this is so that the captors will not seize additional captives.
Mishnah and the Talmud tell us very, very clearly that we will do anything in our power to redeem the captive. If he was taken captive in a war, for example, he just happened to be an innocent casualty, and he's now captive by whoever it is. Or if he was taken captive, let's say he was thrown into prison because he couldn't afford to pay the whatever back in those days, you couldn't afford to pay the mortgage or whatever the rent that you were supposed to pay to the landlord. Often they would throw you into prison, right? In these situations, we pay any money we can. But what about if they're doing it precisely because they know that we will pay anything in order to do it? In other words, the more we pay, the more they'll be incentivized to take more captives. Says the Talmud, then we basically bargain hard. In fact, we bargain the hardest we can. What is that? That is, we set the price at the standard going rate. Unfortunately, in those days, there was a regular market value for a slave, right? We can talk soon about what that would be today. But definitely in those days, there was a regular way. However slaves were determined on the market, that market value is what a non-Jew would pay for another non-Jewish slave. That's what a Jew will pay to redeem a Jewish captive. And if it's more than that, then we will not pay it. Now, in this instance, King Rudolph was demanding an exorbitant fee from the Jewish community, a fee that would have literally bankrupted all Jews at the time in that region. So the Jews turned to the Maharam of Rothenburg himself. He is the leading halachic authority. What does he say to do? And the Maharam of Rothenburg famously says, "Do not redeem me, not at any cost. I want to stay in prison because if the Jewish community pressures itself into redeeming me at the price that he wants, then it will not stop with me. Every single Torah scholar will be in danger. Every single Jew will be in danger because they'll just continue to do it more and more and more." In his words, if we pay an exorbitant price now, they will seize more and more captives, demanding even higher ransoms for their freedom. We get an account of this story from the Maharshal, another contemporary great rabbi. Text 7. Where are we here? Sylvia, I don't know if you have the text. Do you have the text?
I believe I do. The PDF through
Yes.
WhatsApp? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me
So
see.
if you have the PDF in the WhatsApp, then if you can read for us, please, we'll give you the
Okay.
next one.
Okay. Refusing ransom?
Oh, yeah.
Rabbi
Text 7,
Shlomo
refusing
Luria.
ransom. Go ahead.
Okay. I heard about Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, who was imprisoned in the fortress of Ensisheim for several years, and the ruler demanded a large sum from the communities for his release. The communities wished to ransom Rabbi Meir, but he refused, arguing that captives should not be redeemed for more than their worth. His reasoning must have been that if the communities would ransom him, it may incentivize other rulers to do the same and hold other prominent Torah scholars hostage for exorbitant ransoms. Eventually, the wealth of the entire Jewish people would not suffice to ransom them, and the Torah would be forgotten among the Jewish people. Here is the proof that he was right. After this case, the ruler stopped seizing sages and holding them for ransom.
So in other words, the Maharam of Rothenburg's bold move, heroic move, let's call it, actually did yield results. He suffered terribly, as we'll soon see, but it stopped this business of just because it became clear the Jews are not willing to pay any price. Now, I want to talk about that law, because that law ends up being codified by Maimonides. And essentially what he says is that you're only allowed to pay what's called kidei demehen. Kidei demehen means the appropriate amount. How is the actual value of a person measured? So historically, it's defined by the price of people on the slave market. What a non-Jew would pay for another non-Jew on the slave market, that's what we are willing to pay. And since they were demanding a tremendous amount more than that from the community for the Maharam of Rothenburg, for Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, therefore they did not pay it. Rabbi Meir remained in prison for 7 years. But remember, he wasn't in such terrible conditions. He was just imprisoned, right? So his over those 7 years, there were better and worse years. There were times when he was in extreme, he was extremely impoverished. But then there were times when actually they would allow students to come in and study with him. So for 7 years, he continued to varying degrees while he was in prison to teach Torah. And as you can see in text 8 from Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg himself, in his responsa, he actually tells the story of what he wrote. Not the story. He tells the audience, if you will, or the reader of his work, what he composed while he was in prison. And the words that he uses are so sad. Nick, you want to read for us, please? Text 8, total devotion.
When I am released to safety, I will gladly ensure that you receive a copy of my commentary on the sections of the Mishnah Zeraim and Taharot. During my imprisonment, I have not forgotten my Creator, and I have remained devoted to his Torah and to fear of heaven. From the soul obedient to your command.
So 1 second. What you're reading now, Nick, the second paragraph here, as you can see, there was an ellipsis. The second paragraph here is his signature. Look how he describes himself. Go ahead.
This is from the soul obedient to your command, the impoverished, the individual forgotten of all goodness, the downtrodden doormat, once known as Meir, the son of Rabbi Baruch of blessed memory.
It's like so sad to hear him describe himself that way. And he does this on multiple occasions. The askupa nidreses, the trodden doormat, the downtrodden doormat, once known as Rabbi Meir, the son of Rabbi Baruch of blessed memory. Rabbi Meir died in 1293 in captivity after 7 years in prison, but even his death did not get him released. King Rudolph held on to his body, demanding the ransom in order to release it for burial. Obviously being aware of the fact that Jews require that their dead be treated with respect and that they be buried b'kfurat Yisrael with a proper Jewish burial. The community refused in accordance with Rabbi Meir's instructions, and his body remained in captivity for another 14 years, 21 years in total. On page 163 in your book, you can see an interesting manuscript here. The figure in the top right-hand corner of this manuscript page, which was illustrated in Italy in 1479, is a representation of Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. Anyways, without getting into the whole history of it. So this continued until 1307. In 1307, a wealthy Jew from Frankfurt named Alexander Wimpin finally succeeded in brokering a deal with the authorities. Most likely the price had come down by then, both because he had passed and it was just a body, and also because Alexander negotiated with King Rudolph. And after 14 years, eventually the price comes down. And he succeeded in brokering a deal with the authorities, and Rabbi Meir's body was redeemed and laid to rest in the Jewish cemetery in Worms. Upon the death, shortly thereafter, I should say, a few months later, of his benefactor, of Alexander Wimpin, he was actually buried alongside Rabbi Meir. And on page 164, you can see their headstones, and text 9a and 9b are the inscriptions on the headstones, where essentially it tells the story of the fact that Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg was captured on the 4th day of Tammuz in the year 46 of the 6th millennium, 1286 that is. He passed away in captivity, and he was not given a proper burial until the 14th of Adar, and they give the date that he was buried and what year he was buried, etc. Next to him, what?
He was captured.
So you stepped out. You missed the story, but he was captured by King Rudolph, and he was held in captivity, and he died in captivity, and they only released his body after 14 years of him 14 years after his passing. So text 9b is the inscription of the tombstone on the right, which is of Alexander Wimpin, in which it says, that he was the one, so he passed away on Yom Kippur of that same year, well, I guess the next year, but 10 days into the next year, the year 68 of the 6th millennium, which is 1307 the Common Era. And it tells the story of how he actually managed to redeem the body of Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. There's quite a few stories here, first of all, by the way. First of all, it's important to note that the community still never succumbed. The fact that Alexander Wimpin, a rich Jew, chose to redeem it is a separate story, and any wealthy Jew would be allowed to do such a thing. The law that we learned in text, what was it? Text 6, about the fact that the rabbis forbade redeeming captives at more than their going rate. When we see that the non-Jews are taking advantage of us, that only applies to the community. That doesn't apply to an individual, right? So Rabbi Alexander Wimpin would have been allowed to do that. In addition to that, there are stories that are told about Alexander Wimpin. Most notably, that after he redeemed Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, we are told, it's actually from a pretty reputable source, it's from the Sefer Adoros, which is a pretty reputable source. We're told that Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg actually came to him in a dream. And he said to him, he thanked him for redeeming his body from captivity. And he said, I'm going to give you a choice of what you want your reward to be. If you'd like, your family for many generations, for this generation, and for you and your children, etc., you will be granted long life as well as life in peace. In other words, be able to live with enough to support yourselves and enough, and safety and security, etc. Or you can join me in what's known as imi b'mechitzasi. You can join me in the world to come, and split my reward in the world to come with me. And he chose that, and that's why he passed away shortly thereafter. In fact, there's a story that's told that after he passed, Alexander Wimpin, that is, he actually came to the local rabbi in a dream and told him that he is now right next to the Maram of Rothenburg. Not just physically, they were interred next to each other, but also spiritually in the world to come. Their souls are together in the world to come. This is the horrific story of Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, and I think that there are a few lessons that we can learn from this story, and so I want to pause now to learn some more lessons of this story, and then we'll move on to the third story. First of all, the most important overarching lesson that we learn is this concept of kidei de mayhem. We don't overpay for hostages. Number two is the fact that bodies are also considered hostages, which is also a very important factor, I believe. The fact that Jews care so much about Kvurat Yisrael, about Jewish burial, that we will actually go to extremes in order to redeem a body from captivity, not just a human being who was alive. What?
They take the body or they take the person.
Well, the difference is the person is alive, and then when he dies, he can't be alive, right? So that's usually a good thing. I think there's another powerful takeaway from Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg writes that his identity remained the same no matter the circumstances. In other words, a Jew, one of the most beautiful things about a Jew is that you can take him away from everything that physically defines him, right? So let's say he's a carpenter, and you take away his tools, you steal all of his property, so he can't be a carpenter anymore, or he can't be a real estate agent, or he can't be a doctor anymore, whatever it is, right? And you take away his money, and you take away his family, and you take away everything, etc. He still maintains his core identity. His core identity is that he's a Jew, and in the case of Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg specifically, his core identity was that he was a Torah scholar and that he studied Torah and that he was able to lead the Jewish people. And this is why we have so much of this Torah scholarship that's coming from prison. He said, okay, you took it all away from me, but here I am. I can continue to study Torah that you can never take away from me. I think that's another very, very powerful point. In addition, by the way, to the most obvious one, which is that he heroically placed his people before himself. I don't know why the screen seems to be a little bit cut off, but he heroically placed his people before himself. In other words, that he viewed his own life as suspectable if his people will be able to continue and to live. I was going to say undisturbed, but at least less disturbed than they were. Okay, this brings us to our third story. Why? Because until now we've been discussing stories of captives that were individualized. You had a story of 4 captives, of 1 captive, maybe even together with Maram of Rothenburg. Maybe there were other people that were captives together with him. But then our next story is going to be about mass captivity, and not just a single individual, but of thousands of individuals, and the communities who stepped up to save. We're going to turn our attention to the year 1648, when there were tens of thousands of Jews living in what today is called the Ukraine, but at the time was called the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. You can see it on page 166 in your book. You can see a map of the area. And what's most important for us is that at the southern edge of this region, there were two ethnic groups that lived. Okay, there were two different religions, and they technically were of two different nationalities. But they were the common denominator they had was they were both ruthless groups, and they were both rabid Jew haters. Today they're known as different countries. Poland is one country, and Lithuania is another country. But at the time, it was known as the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. I mean, we could go into the whole history of that region, but I think it's beyond the scope. What's important for today is that the Polish-Lithuanian government was paying these two groups of barbarians. Who were these two groups? There was the Kazakhs. They lived inside the Commonwealth at the southern border. And then there were the Tatars. The Tatars lived in so the Kazakhs lived in, if you want to know exactly where it is, it's all over the news today, they lived in the Crimea area, right? You've heard of Crimea, right? It's all over the news today. So that's where the Kazakhs lived. And the Kazakhs were Christian, Orthodox Christian, right? They also were ruthless tyrants who persecuted Jews. The Tatars were Muslim, and they lived just south of the border. Okay, so just outside of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Now, for a long time, these two groups were actually being paid by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. I know this is strange to us, but they were paying the Kazakhs to defend them, to defend the country. Their army wasn't enough to defend them against the Tatars, or against the Kazakhs for that matter. As a result, they paid at different times to these two different groups, basically to keep the peace. They would pay the Kazakhs to help defend the Commonwealth, and they would pay the Tatars not to bribe them, so to speak, not to invade. Okay? Now, unfortunately, in the year 1648, what happened was there was a man, a horrific man, a tyrant by the name of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. He was a Cossack warrior. May his name be blotted out forever. And he flipped the status quo. What did he do? He said, why should we fight with each other? We both have a common enemy, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And he formed a military alliance between the Cossacks and the Tatars. Now, one difference in their barbarity was that the Cossacks had no financial interest. They were just bloodthirsty. So they wanted to kill as many as they can. The Muslim Tatars, they were just as bloodthirsty tyrants, but they also understood that human beings have value. And you can take human beings as slaves and you can sell them, you can actually finance whatever else it is that you want to do. So as part of their alliance, the alliance was that whenever they would fight a war, those that were the weak and the downtrodden, etc., the Cossacks would murder. And those that were of some value, those that had some sort of what's what I'm looking for? Finance, yeah, like if they were able to fetch a good price on the slave market, then those people, which was usually the young men, those people were taken as slaves by the Tatars, and the Tatars would sell them on the slave market. Okay, so with the support of the Tatars, the Khmelnytsky Cossack, what was that? Was in Iran as well? I did not know. Okay. By the way, for what it's worth, most of these pogroms that were led by the Cossacks and the Tatars together actually happened in this coming month, the month that we're starting this Wednesday, which is Rosh Chodesh Sivan. We're going to start the month of Sivan. That's when this happened. You may have noticed this past Shabbat, if you were in the shul, so once a month we bless the new moon, right? We bless the new month. And this past Shabbat, which was the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh, we blessed the new month of Sivan. And actually, usually it's considered a happy occasion, and therefore we don't say the prayer for martyrs, Av Harachamim, right? We don't say it. But on Shabbat, Mevarchim Rosh Chodesh Sivan, when it's the month that we bless the month of Sivan, we do say it. Why is that? That's because there was a higher amount of martyrs that happened in the month of Sivan, particularly during these 2 years of Tach Betat, the years 1648 and 1649, during these Cossack and Tatar pogroms under Bogdan Khmelnytsky. We say it between Shachrit and Musaf.
What is it?
We say it every week. We say it every week. Besides for Shabbat Mevarchim, we do not say it. But on Shabbat Mevarchim Rosh Chodesh Sivan, we still say it. So in other words, my point is that we find ourselves right now in the period of time when they actually happen, when most of these massacres happen. Okay. So this is what's known, you can see in the schema as Tahbet, this wave of pogroms against the Jewish people. Now, the Tatars took these any young able-bodied people captive, and as a result, we end up with this massive crisis. This massive crisis. There are thousands of Jews that are the surviving Jews became refugees, fleeing into Poland and the other neighboring towns, right? But the Cossack army, but the Tatars had thousands and thousands of slaves. It's estimated that they sold about 10,000 slaves a year, okay? Which actually rivals the Atlantic slave industry that we're all familiar with for its cruelty and efficiency. Now, among those tens of thousands of slaves were many, many Jews. And the Hebrew chronicles that were written by the survivors of massacres describe the scenes in graphic and horrific detail. We're not going to read all of it. One of the best-known chronicles of Tafbetat is Rabbi Nissen Hanover's Yevain Metzula, in which he describes some of the horrific things that happened during these pogroms. The text that we are going to read comes from Rabbi Avraham Ashkenazi, who was a resident of Lodmir. Today it's known as Volodomir, a city in the Volnya region. Trust me, I don't know any of this by heart either. I'm just reading the textbook here. In the area which today would be northwest Ukraine, and the text pointedly describes the advance of the Cossacks and the Tatars into their region in August or September of August through September of 1648, and it also gives voice to the unshaken faith that they had in God and the redemption that He will bring for the Jewish people. Mickey, you want to read it for us, please? Text 10.
Who can recall all our troubles? All the seeds of pain and deeds filled, it was not suffice to write all our afflictions. Who could recount how the Tatars entered the region of Bohemia and burned all our property, gone with our synagogues and Torah scroll, and killed all the righteous, our crown. Now you, God, Lord of our fathers, look down and hear our cry. Redemption for our exile, walk amidst our camps. Days when we will cleanse. God, return our captives.
That last line is the part that interests us most. What was it?
Before that, Mashiach.
Yeah, he's referring to Mashiach's times. He wants Mashiach to come, but what is the last line that he uses, right? This is the part that most interests us. Of course, he's describing, and there's a couple of gaps here, but he describes some of the horrific tortures and things that went on, the raping and the pillaging that went on in these villages. But to us, what we are most interested in is that last line. Shuva Hashem Shivutin. God, return our captives. Why? Because among all of these massacres, there were also many, many captives that were taken. One of the captives was Rabbi Ashkenazi's fellow townsman, Rabbi Yaakov Koppel Margolis of Lodmir. And he describes, I mean, it's horrific, but he describes his kidnapping in text 11. Elise, can you read it for us, please? We're on page 168. Well, you know what, Avram, do you want to read it for us?
Okay.
1 second. Elise, Avram is going to read this one, you'll read the next one.
All right.
The plenitude of time have carried me the evil dream that had befallen us in the land of Poland. You receive the results of heaven decrees for us. Those destined for the sword, to the sword. Those destined for starvation, to starvation. And those destined for captivity, to captivity. It's referring to Jeremiah 15 and 2. The best least and faith in a progressive order of severity for captivity include all of the previously mentioned suffering. I am among the exiles, taken captive with my son and daughter. We were led into exile in iron chains. My feet were bound in chains. They drove me and my children away from my family, from my father's house, and from my homeland to a foreign land. I have been banished from the inheritance of the Holy One. I said in my heart, and this my tears, who is with me? Who will be my tower of strength? who in the heavens will spread his hands to take me, to draw me from the raging water? Who do I have on falling soil who will give me refuge and shelter? Who will stand by me and help me like a friend, to be like a brother to me?
The destination of Rabbi Margolis and his fellow Jewish captives was Istanbul. Why? The Tatars were Muslim. They knew that they would fetch a good price on the Muslim slave market, so they were going to Istanbul. In Istanbul, then known as Constantinople, there was a booming slave market, and it had a sizable Jewish community, right? Now, this Jewish community, where did they come from? Anybody remember? We learned about it last week. It was dominated mainly by Sephardic.
Spain.
Very good, thank you. Sephardic.
Okay.
Who brought these Sephardic Jews there? You remember this? Doña Grazia. She had a huge hand in this, right? It was Spanish and Portuguese Jews that had fled the port. We're now in the 1600s. It was only 200 years earlier, or 150 years earlier, that Jews were fleeing Spain and Portugal, right? And under Doña Grazia, they arrived in Istanbul, Constantinople, where things were much more relaxed for them. And some of them ended up in Italy, etc. But you have this massive Sephardic congregation. Who are these Jews? Yes, you are Sephardic. What? Right. But I'm saying these Jews that we're talking about here, that are in Istanbul, they are Spanish Jews because they came from Spain. Now, who are the Jews that are arriving as captives? Squarely Ashkenazi Jews. They're coming literally from Ukraine, right? Like the seat of the Ashkenazi Jews. And actually, you see one of the most beautiful things happen. The Sephardic Jews of Turkey, they literally mortgage their homes, they sell their jewelry, they put everything on the side. And this is not for one massive movement. This is to rescue captive after captive after captive that comes kidnapped from these Tatars from there, paying hefty prices in order to redeem them. In fact, Rabbi Ashkenazi describes the extraordinary generosity of the Jewish women of Istanbul. He says the women of Istanbul removed the bands from their waists to pay for the ransom and took the ransom slaves into their homes where they supported them for a long time. Let's go back to Rabbi Margolis to see how he was redeemed. Elise, you're going to read it for us, please. How he was redeemed by or ransomed by the Jews of Istanbul. Text 12.
Okay, here I go.
Righteous rescuers.
Okay.
170.
God granted me mercy at the hands of virtuous people, the noble men of the land who are generous, righteous, and pious people, descendants of saintly ancestors, compassionate folk who are authentic descendants of the compassionate nation, the members of the holy Jewish community of Constantinople. Many prominent among them were the perfect sages who study Torah day and night and who perform acts of kindness with the children of Israel who are being held by harsh masters. These people redeem me. May their homes be peaceful. May there be peace in their bastions and life forevermore.
Okay. Now, eventually, the thousands of captives that were arriving as refugees in Istanbul became too much for the Jews of Istanbul to keep up with. When their money ran out, the Istanbul community sent emissaries to enlist the help of other Jewish communities around the world. This is mind-boggling. I'm unaware of a time, perhaps even up until today, when the entire Jewish world united, as you see now, for example, right? The Jewish world uniting around the hostage crisis. Here you see the entire Jewish world uniting around the hostage crisis. Let me give you a little bit of insight into this, okay? There were one of the people that was very instrumental in redeeming captives, or at least involved to some degree, was Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael, who we learned about. Menashe ben Israel, we learned about him in influential Jews. He was very influential in terms of spreading the light of Torah to the nations, etc. He lived in Amsterdam. But besides for him, probably the two leading figures in this movement were two brothers, Yaakov and rabbis, Yaakov and Yosef Abuhav. Abuhav was a Sephardic last name and a very, very distinguished and rabbinic family for many years in Spain, and then even after they left Spain, these particular rabbis lived in Venice. Right? Remember I said that the Spanish Portuguese Jews ended up in Amsterdam, Italy, and Istanbul. And to get a picture of the magnitude of this crisis, I want to read this letter, which is text 13, an appeal for help by Rabbi Yaakov Abuhav and Rabbi Yosef Abuhav. It's a letter dated the 4th of Tammuz. So remember, most of this is happening Sivan, Tammuz, right? the summer months, if you will, August, September, July, August, September. And let's read this letter that they write. It's on page 172 in the Hebrew, text 13. I'm going to read it. You can follow along with me. We address ourselves to the two commanders of Israel's armies, distinguished in mitzvot and good deeds, renowned and praised individuals, unique in their excellence, the illustrious Rabbi Zan Vilhaz and the illustrious Rabbi Ber Oppenheim. May they live with strength and peace. Now's not time to get into who these two rabbis. They were prominent rabbis in Frankfurt, in Germany, etc. In other words, they're reaching out outside of the Sephardic community. What do they write? Our souls grieved as we heard cries for help coming from our brethren abducted from distant lands in the renowned city of Constantinople. The poor oppressed captives from Poland are groaning in need as load after load arrives in Constantinople, strained and distraught. The Constantinople community is unable to continue paying for their ransom because their kindness and righteousness have already reached beyond the heavens. They report that they have redeemed over 1,500 people, expending a vast fortune of over 150,000 reals. I'll give you an idea in a moment about how much money that is. What can they do? What can they do now for the remaining survivors, the fresh arrivals who are impoverished and in iron chains, suffering under the hands of harsh masters? For the sum of the donations from these places is insufficient for their redemption. The ellipses here is because the brothers go on about how, as a result, that there's no more funds, and some of the captives are being sold to non-Jews. He continues. Seeing that the esteemed individuals responsible for the redemption of captives have turned to us, we feel that it is our duty to compose this letter of entreaty to your honors, and asking that you seize this great mitzvah. We ask you to strive with generous hearts and fear of God to arrange that the leaders of your holy community and send money to the city of Constantinople as quickly as possible. You may send it with whichever messages you choose through our city, Venice. Hasten the redemption of multitudes of a multitude whose eyes look out desperately for your charity. The matter cannot stand delay. The faithful giver of reward who sows righteousness and brings forth salvation will repay your honors for your toil and efforts in this mitzvah with double payment of the best blessings and success. May God raise you high and protect you with great strength and peace. Venice, the 4th of Tammuz, 5411, 1651, from your loyal friends who stand ready to serve you. Unbelievable. To give you an idea, the price that was paid by the community of the captives is said to be 150,000 Spanish reals, right? That equals about 100 reals each, because they said there was about 1,500 captives that they had redeemed thus far. To give context to how much money that is, 100 reals is the equivalent of 26 days of wages for a master carpenter in Venice at this time. In other words, about a month's wages for an upper class Jew. So what's that today? $15,000, $20,000 at least. Right, that they're paying per captive in order to redeem them. It's unbelievable. This tzedakah and this unity that you see in order to redeem the Jewish captives is an unbelievable concept. Over the next few years, Jewish captives continue to be brought to Istanbul. Incredibly, the Jews of Istanbul, with the support of the international Jewish community, they were successful in ransoming the large majority of these captives. An estimated redeemed an estimation of how many captives were redeemed is somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 hostages that were redeemed over the course of that decade. This incredible generosity was noted not just by Jews, even non-Jews at the time. And I love when we get to do this. Like, I don't know, for some reason, Jews tend not to believe Jewish sources. They're like, oh yeah, of course the Jewish sources say that the Jews were very generous, etc. But take a look, even the non-Jews are watching this unfold and they're blown away. Mickey, can you read for us, please, text 14, Jewish charity?
Amongst themselves, Jews are extremely charitable. They take great care of the poor, adding to the price of meat, 1 soul per pound. By the end of the year, this makes a large sum, which is used for feeding and supporting the poor, as well as ransoming Jewish slaves, whom the Turks and Tatars take in addition to the Poles. As a result, there are no Jews in the Sultan's galleys, apart from those convicted of crimes.
I really don't know how to, I don't think it could be overstated. I really don't know how to laud the praises of these Ladino-speaking Spanish, Portuguese Jews, Sephardic Jews that are in Italy, that are in Amsterdam, that are in Istanbul, and how amazing this is. Think about it. the Jews that they're redeeming don't look like them. They don't speak the same language as them. They're taking them into their homes. These Sephardic communities are speaking Ladino. They speak Yiddish. They're coming, right, speak Yiddish and Russian and Ukrainian, whatever they spoke over there at the time, Polish, etc., right? Yet it was never a question to them. And they didn't just redeem them. They sold the shirts off their back to take them into their home. Literally. I mean, when you talk about giving up a month's worth per captive, right? I don't know how much that was per person in the community, etc. It's too hard to crunch those numbers. And honestly, it's a little redundant to do that. The most important thing to understand is that they were essentially saying, we are going to eat less. We are going to wear less clothing. We are going to have less luxuries in our life. We are literally going to bite. It wasn't like, oh, I have extra money, I'll give tzedakah. Let's see if this is the best cause. Let me see which cause I'll give it to. You know, like the way we give tzedakah today. Like, oh, I have some extra. I'll give some ice. I'll give 10%. No, you're talking here about literally people who were tightening their belts in order to help their Jews. As a contemporary historian explains it in text 15, Adam Teller. Susie, can you read this for us, please? Page 175. Don't forget to unmute yourself. This is Adam Teller in his book, The Rescue of the Surviving Souls. But this is a contemporary book. Adam Teller is still with us. Go ahead.
The connection between Jews derived from the Torah. Without that, the connection between the Sephardi Jews of the Mediterranean world and the Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern Europe would have been tenuous after all. They spoke different languages, practiced different rituals and customs, had different historical experiences from at least the 10th century, and understood their place in the world in different ways. It was their understanding of belonging to a single religiously defined people, chosen by God and forged by the experience at Mount Sinai, that allowed the Jews of the 17th century to feel connected with each other over great distances.
And I think that that's a very, very important point. What is it that makes a Jew who doesn't speak the same language as another Jew, right? That doesn't look the same as another Jew, that doesn't eat the same foods as another Jew, right? Because they're Sephardi, they're Ashkenazi, they're completely, they're Ukrainian and well, what we call today Ukrainian, right? But Polish or Lithuanian, etc. And they are Spanish. What is the same? What do they have that's the same? What they have the same is this unbreakable bond. Ashkenazi Yiddish-speaking Jews were rescued by Sephardic Jews who didn't even speak their language. Why? Because when it came to helping Jews out during their time of need, there was no difference that carried any weight. They are Jews, they are Jews, they are Jews, they are Jews. In other words, we all keep the same Torah, we all do the same mitzvahs, we all have the same God, and as a result, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Yes, sorry.
You remember you said something about Jewish and Jews, they eat and
I'm saying they were Sephardic and Ashkenazi. They would have eaten different foods. They would have spoken different languages. They would have dressed in different clothing. If they would have met each other on the street, they wouldn't even necessarily known that each other are Jewish. But they understood that at their core, they're Jewish, and a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, which I think is beautiful. Okay. Now, this concludes the third historical episode that we went through, which is the captive crisis of 1648, or Tach V'Tat, as it's known in Hebrew. And I think there are two lessons that we can take from this. Number one is the root of our connection is our sheer Torah and mitzvot, and also about the achdut, the unity that there is between Jews is legendary, that it surpasses all physical borders, all aesthetic borders, all age limitations, all genders, all stereotypes. And you see this even by the contemporary people at the time, non-Jews, that is, observing this unity that there is among the Jewish people. Okay. Now, we came here, of course, to discuss history. But we came to discuss history in terms of being able to sharpen a lens on the current hostage crisis that there is currently. I think there are still 20-something hostages, live hostages, that is, right? And we learned today that bodies are also very, very important, languishing in Gaza. How does everything that we discussed here today apply to the contemporary question of what Israel should be doing in a hostage situation, such as the recent Hamas attacks on October 7th, 2023?
when we had an Antabi, when the Jews are the Israelis, they saved them. Israel cannot save these people who were in captivity.
They did.
You know, Antabi.
Yeah, in Antabi. They did.
Israel, why they cannot bring these hostages out?
That's a good question. It seems that it's a lot more difficult in Gaza than it was in Antabi. Okay. So while I'm not really going to be able to do justice in the remaining 7 minutes that we have to be able to really unpack how Israel should be dealing with this, etc., neither do I even really believe that it's our obligation to know how. And we discussed some of it in a lesson that I gave, a lecture that I gave called How Israel Wins. I don't know how many of you took that lesson with me. It was here. It was about 20, 30 people. Anyways, okay. But what I'd like to try to do is talk about some of the things, and you can see on page 178. I'd like to talk about some of the things that are the same and some of the things that are different. Okay? The first point I want to make is that it's a mitzvah. We're not going to read this inside. I'm just going to summarize the points. Number one, the first most obvious parallel that we can draw from all the discussion we had today is that it's not just a mitzvah, it is our responsibility. We learned about just how important Pidyon Shvuyim is. If there is a Jew languishing somewhere, it is a mitzvah, it is an obligation that every single one of us has, both a positive mitzvah and a negative mitzvah, to redeem them from captivity, and that is extremely important to recognize. Okay, but moving past that very basic point, there is the point of not paying more than Kidei D'Mehem. Okay, Kidei D'Mehem means not paying more than the standard going rate for a captive. Now today, there are no slave markets. There isn't a standard going rate. However, what we do have is that generally, most Western countries refuse to negotiate with terrorists, which means that for all intents and purposes, there is no price, really, that's a going rate that we would be willing to pay for a hostage. And that becomes a very, very important point. If you take a look on page 178, there's a tshuva that is written by Rabbi Yehuda Henkin. And you see that he writes in 1976, he writes that we see that all you bring up to the terrorists. So basically, there's no releasing a prison terrorist is not considered paying more than the value of the hostages. So he says that basically because in 1976, countries would actually negotiate with terrorists and they would release terrorists in exchange for hostages, he writes that you should be doing that, right? But take a look at the second paragraph. Note, he says, I wrote the above in the summer of 1976, but since then circumstances have changed. Politically, most Western countries adopted, during those years in the 70s, they adopted a policy of not negotiating with terrorists. And governments do not, they no longer release imprisoned terrorists to save hostages. Consequently, he says, that would be considered paying more, even releasing a single terrorist would be considered paying more than the standard rate for what a hostage is worth. And he says, therefore, it's forbidden.
So they need the money of somebody from the soldier who said they might be hostage come back to Israel.
No, to the best of my understanding, they're not looking for money. They're looking for an exchange with terrorists. Now, the second point that I want to make, which is different than perhaps most of the hostage situations that we mentioned today, that's different today, is that every single hostage that there is in Gaza today is considered to be in grave danger, in direct danger. They can die at any single moment. Why? Because Hamas is not looking for finances, like Avram pointed out. They're not looking for money. This is not an economic or political question. This is a question of somebody who hates you and wants to kill you. So as a result, it actually ups the ante of how much we should be looking to redeem them, right? Particularly in this instance, through military operations, okay? Another instance is that the price that's being demanded here is not just to redeem political prisoners, despite however much Hamas likes to portray it that way in the media. The people that they are asking for us to release are terrorists. So there becomes a whole different consideration. And again, I'm not really giving conclusive answers here. I'm just trying to give different elements to the conversation that are important to factor in, which is that when you're releasing terrorists, you're actually talking about a direct future risk for Jewish people. And especially standing in 2025, right? We know this to be the case. Why? What was his name? Yahya Sinwar, may his name be blotted out. May his memory be blotted out. Was a released prisoner from a prior hostage negotiation, I think for Gilad Shalit, if I remember correctly, when he was released. And the terrorists say that they are being released and they will continue to murder and to take hostage from more and more Jews. So that changes the whole game, right? Why? Because it's not that they're asking for money and then possibly they'll take more hostages in order to make more money. No, they may actually go and murder more Jews. So you may actually be trading potential Jewish lives for this hostage. That's another aspect that it. And finally, probably most importantly, this is the only real conclusive point that I'll make. Most of the regular laws that apply to freeing hostages apply at a time of peace, not at a time of war. When you're talking about an active case of war, right? There are clear indications in the Torah that when it comes to war, we have to do everything in our power to win the war. And again, for those of you that were here at the How Israel Wins course, we discussed a lot about the fact that when it comes to fighting a war, not even a war of expanding territory, Israel is not trying to expand territory here, right? When it comes to fighting a war, there are certain things that the Torah demands that we do. Number one is we should always be preemptive in our attacks, which October 7th clearly was not, unless you count, for example, the Hezbollah operation up in Lebanon. That was preemptive, and that was actually a much more Jewish approach than some of the reactive things that have been done in Gaza, kind of reacting after they attack. Probably the best one, even though they did it reluctantly, probably the best one that Israel fought that way was the 6-Day War, which was 100% proactive. And in addition, hold on. And in addition to being proactive, the 6-Day War, because it was proactive, must have saved tens of thousands of lives. No question about it. And in addition to that, there's another law about war. That is that when we're talking about a war, again, not to expand territory, a war fighting for our very survival, there is a Jewish obligation to fight the war ad ridata, which means until the end. Until the enemy itself know, not just that they lost the war, but they know that they lost the war. And to disarm them in a way that they will no longer be able to attack again. And in my opinion, this is one of the mistakes that Israel made. Israel should have been fighting the war very, very differently from the beginning, from October 7th. And perhaps we're seeing a little bit of a shift in approach now. More recently, you see that they're talking about completely winning the war and eradicating Hamas. I mean, they've been talking about it since October 7th that way, but more recently, in the past week or two, there's been discussion about taking over Gaza and completely destroying Hamas and maintaining control over the entire Gaza, etc., which perhaps is a much more Jewish approach. I'd like to end today's lesson. I'm sorry, Avram. I'll take questions in just a moment. I'd like to end today's lesson on a much happier note, if you will. I'm not happier is the right word. I'm much more hopeful. That's what I'm looking for. A much more hopeful note. We're going to end off with a prayer. Every one of you has in front of you this card, the prayer for the hostages, the same one we sing each week in shul. And I want you to have in mind the names that there are at the bottom of the page, which are the names of the hostages that are still alive in Gaza. And we'll sing this prayer together, and this will conclude today's lesson.
אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה ומאפלה לאורה ומשעבוד לגאולה השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה ומאפלה לאורה ומשעבוד לגאולה השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב.
Please join me in the English. Our siblings, the whole house of Israel, who are in distress and captivity, who wander over sea and over land. May Hashem have mercy on them and bring them from distress to comfort, from darkness to light, from subjugation to redemption, now, swiftly, and soon. And let us all say, Amen. Please turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson.
Lesson 4. Heroes and Hostages. Narratives. 1. In the 10th century, 4 great rabbis were captured by pirates on the Mediterranean Sea. They were redeemed by communities in Egypt, Tunisia, and Spain. These rabbis revolutionized the study of Torah in these communities, allowing the communities to become spiritually self-sufficient and ushering in a new era of Jewish scholarship and history. 2. Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg was the leading rabbinic authority in Germany in the 13th century. As government persecution of the Jews worsened, he led a daring attempt to escape Germany and settle in the land of Israel. Imprisoned by King Rudolf I of Germany and held for ransom, Rabbi Meir prevented the community from paying the requested sum, citing a Talmudic enactment against overpaying for captives in order to disincentivize future hostage-taking. 3. In 1648, the Cossacks and Tatars launched a joint revolt against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that ruled Ukraine. Tens of thousands of Jews were killed in anti-Semitic pogroms, and thousands of Jews were taken captive for sale on the Istanbul slave market. The Jews of Istanbul launched an international Jewish relief effort and successfully ransomed the large majority of the captives. General points. 1. Jewish law deems redeeming captives the greatest mitzvah possible. However, some restrictions are placed on the price that can be paid for ransom in order to avoid incentivizing future hostage-taking. 2. Jewish communities around the world have been historically able to mobilize on behalf of redeeming their captive brethren because they have felt a deep connection and responsibility for each other. The roots of this unity are their shared Torah and mitzvot. 3. Jewish law and history provide experience and guidance for dealing with hostage situations. This background arms us with insight and perspective for navigating the complex dilemmas raised by contemporary terrorist hostage situations.
Thank you all for joining us for lesson 4 of Colorful Profiles. And this concludes also the course. For those of you that have been taking the course, this concludes the course. I did want to take one more minute of your time just to pitch the upcoming course. Bring it a little closer so that those that are on Zoom can see. The pitch the upcoming course, which we have coming up in the summer. But the first date is going to be June 23rd. And on June 23rd, we're going to be starting a course which is called Fascinating Facts. It's going to be a 6-week course in which we're basically going to be answering a series of interesting, like in very quick succession. Each week we'll tackle like 10 questions. Just these interesting myths and mysteries and fascinating insights into Judaism. So it's like, I feel like we've been doing a lot of serious courses recently. I mean, this one had all about the hostages, and the previous one was decoding the Talmud, which was very deep. This one is very light, very fun. When we tackle questions like, what is the evil eye? How does it work? What kind of tree was the tree of knowledge? Do angels have wings? Is an eye for an eye meant to be taken literally? What does abracadabra mean? Did Moses have horns? Who wrote the handwriting on the wall? Do Jews believe in Satan? You might think you know the answers to these questions. You might be like, yes, no, maybe, whatever. You heard this, you heard that, etc. But our goal is going to be to spend 5-10 minutes on each question, maybe 12-15 minutes for a long one, and give a proper answer, well-sourced, etc., and move on to the next interesting and fun question. The 6 lessons are titled Lesson 1, Know Something About the Bible. Lesson 2, From Womb to Tomb. Lesson 3, Angels, Blessings, and Evil Eyes. Lesson 4, Foods and Feasts, where we'll talk all about Jewish foods. Like, where does gefilte fish come from? Are any foods Jewish? All foods really come from, right, from wherever Jews hung out, their locale. Anyways, Angels, Blessings, and Evil Eyes, Foods and Feasts. Lesson 5, it's all Hebrew to me. We'll do a lot of Hebrew, interesting linguistic points. And lesson 6, we'll be doing a lot of busting of myths and misconceptions and urban legends and showing the truth from Jewish sources. I hope you'll join us for this course. It's a 6-week course. It's $129 per person or $229 per couple. We're going to be doing it the same way we always do it. 1 p.m. will be a Zoom version. 7:30 p.m. will be in person. There'll be 6 Mondays going through the summer from June 23rd all the way till, what is it, August something? Right? Should be something like that at the beginning of August. If you'd like to join us for it, if you've been in this course, register for this course, and you have a 10% discount up until Shabbos that you can take advantage of. And other than that, I want to invite everybody to Shavuot, right? That's it. Shavuot, all night learning this coming Sunday night, and to hear the 10 Commandments on Monday, very, very important. Thank you all for joining us.